It's wonderful to work with Amory because you never have to introduce him, and yet that's what I've been asked to do. Most people in the energy sector go something like this. Oh, you work with Amory? I read his thinking already 30 years ago. He's been a source of inspiration for me for all those times. It was about 30 years ago that Amory started the Rocky Mountain Institute and laid out his vision for a low-carbon energy economy. An economy and an energy system that is prosperous, that provides us a secure future, and above all, a clean future. Amory came up with the idea of negawatts, the idea that it is much better not to use energy than to have to use it. Amory came up with the idea of using carbon fiber in the automotive sector, and finally we're seeing traction. Amory came up with the idea of deep retrofitting existing buildings in order to make them more energy efficient, and we've seen that implemented from the White House to the Empire State Building. And about 2 years ago, Amory and his team created a very tangible vision of how we can take the economy to a true low-carbon, prosperous future. And I'm very pleased, Amory, that you'll be telling us about that right now. Ladies and gentlemen, Amory Lovins.
Thank you, Jules. Thank you to all the sponsors and organizers for making it possible for us to be together here at Globe again. It's been many years since I was here. Great city, great event. I have the honor to share with you the findings of an ambitious synthesis of U.S. energy solutions that I think will have considerable application in British Columbia and in Canada. And in fact, there is a Canadian team that's been working for over a year on applying it to Canada, so watch this space. We have also now brought these ideas to China and are working with 3 other organizations, 2 in China full-time and 1 a lot, to apply what I'm about to tell you to the Chinese situation using their modelers, models, data, and examples with a view to informing the 13th five-year plan that's now emerging. What I'll describe took 61 of us 6 quarters to do with a lot of help from industry on both content and peer review. And we published it 2.5 years ago as a business book called Reinventing Fire, with forwards by the president of Shell Oil and the then chairman of the largest U.S. nuclear and 3rd largest coal-fired utility. This might surprise you a bit when you learn what's in it. In my country, and I fear also in yours lately, there's been a rather odd public conversation about energy, and it goes something like this. Would you rather die of A, oil wars, or B, climate change, or C, nuclear holocaust, that is from proliferation, or D, all of the above, or E, none of the above, which is the choice we're seldom offered? So what if we could make energy do our work without working our undoing? Could we imagine fuel without fear? Could we actually reinvent fire? And we chose that big poetic title because long ago, fire made us human, then fossil fuels made us modern. But now we need a new fire that makes us safe, secure, healthy, and durable. That's now become possible for both our countries. In fact, it works better and costs less than what we're doing now. So let's see how that could work. 4/5 of the world's energy still comes from burning each year about 19 cubic kilometers of the rotted remains of primeval swamp goo. And as a member of the National Petroleum Council in the United States, I should tell you, and it's true, that those fossil fuels have built our civilization, created our wealth, and enriched the lives of billions of people. But the rising costs to our security, economy, health, and environment are eroding, if not outweighing, their benefits. And that's why we need a new fire. Switching from the old fire to the new fire changes two big stories, oil and electricity. And they have almost nothing to do with each other. They're less than 1% connected in North America, less than 5% in the world. But the uses of these two forms of energy are similarly concentrated. 3/4 of U.S. oil fuels transport, 3/4 of the electricity powers buildings, the rest of both runs industry. So very efficient transport and land use, buildings and factories can save oil and coal and natural gas that can displace both of them. But today's energy system isn't just inefficient, it's also disconnected, aging, dirty, and insecure, so it needs refurbishment. But by 2050, we found it could become efficient, connected, and distributed with elegantly frugal vehicles, buildings, and factories, all relying on a secure, modern, and resilient electricity system. So in the United States, for example, we can eliminate our addiction to oil and coal by 2050 and use a third less natural gas while switching to threefold more efficient use and 3/4 renewable supplies. That's the transition I'll describe for you. And we found that by 2050, this could cost the United States $5 trillion less in net present value than business as usual, counting all hidden or external costs like carbon emissions at zero, a conservatively low estimate, and lower than the price you have put on it in British Columbia. Thank you very much for that. And yet we found that this cheaper energy system could support a 158% bigger U.S. economy, all without needing oil or coal or nuclear energy. And this transition would need no new inventions and no new national taxes, subsidies, mandates, or laws, thus end running Washington gridlock. Let me say that again. I'm going to tell you how the United States, for example, could get completely off oil and coal, $5 trillion cheaper with no act of Congress led by business for profit. There are some policy changes required to enable and speed this change, but it turns out they can all be done administratively or at a state level, because our states, like your provinces, are where, in fact, most of our energy policy gets made and has been for a long time. So the idea here is to use our most effective institutions, private enterprise co-evolving with civil society, and in the U.S. case sped by military innovation, to go around our least effective institutions. And whether you care most about profits and jobs and competitive advantage, or about national security, or about environmental stewardship, creation care, climate, and public health, Reinventing Fire makes sense and it makes money. Now, General Eisenhower reputedly said, no one's quite sure whether he actually said it, that expanding the boundaries of a tough problem makes it soluble by encompassing more options, more synergies, more degrees of freedom. So instead of chopping a tough problem into smaller bite-sized pieces, we should move the boundaries out until they include what the solution requires. Therefore, in Reinventing Fire, we integrated all 4 energy-using sectors: buildings, transport, industry, electricity, and we integrated 4 kinds of innovation, not only the usual 2, technology and public policy, but also 2 more powerful ones that are normally left out, namely design, the way we combine technologies, and competitive strategy, new business models, the whole role of strategy, which is often neglected by economic modelers. But these combinations of all four kinds of innovation yield a lot more than the sum of their parts, and especially they often create deeply disruptive business opportunities. Where to start? Well, a very good place to start would be in the automotive sector, because autos use nearly half our oil, and the United States pays about $2 billion a day for oil, plus an extra $4 billion a day for the hidden economic and military costs of our oil dependence. So let's start by making autos oil-free. Now, 2/3 of the energy needed to move a typical car is caused by its weight. And every unit of energy we save at the wheels by taking out weight or drag or rolling resistance saves another 6 units of energy you don't need to waste getting it to the wheels, so it leverages 7 units of fuel savings at the tank. And yet, for the past quarter century, our 2-ton autos have actually suffered an epidemic of obesity. They have gained weight twice as fast as we have. But happily, today we have ultralight, ultra-strong materials like carbon fiber composites that can make dramatic weight savings snowball and can make autos simpler and surprisingly cheaper to build. Lighter and more slippery autos need less force to move them, so their engine gets smaller, and that means you can afford to electrify the propulsion because now you need 2 or 3 times fewer of those costly batteries or fuel cells. Therefore, the sticker price of the vehicle can drop to about today's level, and of course the driving cost per kilometer is lower from the start. So this specific sequence of innovations can transform automakers from wringing tiny savings out of essentially Victorian steel stamping and engine technologies to the steeply falling costs of 3 mutually reinforcing technologies: the ultralight materials, their manufacturing techniques to make structures out of them, and electric propulsion. And if you're exploiting 3 steep and synergistic learning curves while your competitor is out on the flat part of one learning curve, you win. The sales of such vehicles can grow and their prices can drop even faster with a temporary fee-bate, that is, fees charged on inefficient new autos paying for rebates on efficient ones. You can make it revenue and size neutral. There are at least 6 such systems operating in the world, 5 in Europe, 1 in Singapore, and the biggest one in France, in its first 2 years, tripled the speed of improving auto efficiency. The resulting shift to electric autos is going to be as game-changing as shifting from small incremental improvements in typewriters to the dramatic Moore's Law-driven gains in computers. And of course, computers and electronics are now North America's biggest industry, while typewriter makers have vanished. So vehicle fitness, taking the obesity out of the car, opens a powerful new automotive competitive strategy that doubles the oil savings in 40 years, but also makes affordable the electrification that can save the rest of the oil. Now, North America or Japan or China could lead this next automotive revolution. The formidable barriers are much more cultural than they're technical or economic, and we're helping the new leaders of the auto industry on several continents to tackle them. But the current leader is Germany. Last year, Volkswagen started making this 0.9 diesel liter per 100 kilometer 2-seat carbon fiber plug-in hybrid car. They're in low volume initial production. And BMW also started ramping up mid-volume production of this carbon fiber battery electric car. They've confirmed that its carbon fiber is paid for by needing fewer batteries. And their CEO says, "We do not intend to be a typewriter maker," because he can look across München to where Olympia used to make excellent typewriters. Audi has also shown a less than 0.9 liter per 100 kilometer carbon fiber plug-in hybrid concept SUV. Now, there are some interesting things that North American firms can bring to this party. 7 or 8 years ago, a process developed by one of our spin-offs made by Carbon Cap, which is a test piece for military helmets that have been shipping for several years. They made it in 1 minute, and it's a carbon fiber thermoplastic form that you can tell from the sound is extraordinarily stiff and strong. Actually, it's tougher than titanium. Let's see, I think we can pass it around as long as you're really sure that I'll get it back again. But don't worry about dropping it. Tom Friedman actually whacked it with a sledgehammer as hard as he could and couldn't even scuff it. Now, the technology, by the way, has been sold to a German Tier 1 whose North American operations are in Ontario. So it's now in the supply chain. And this sort of manufacturing technique and its 16 competitors can scale, and this one in particular can scale to automotive cost and speed with essentially aerospace performance. That would save about 4/5 of the capital needed for automaking. It would save lives because these materials can absorb 6 to 12 times the crash energy of steel per kilo and do so more smoothly. And the oil saved in U.S. automaking alone would be equivalent to 1.5 Saudis or half an OPEC. That essentially we can find by drilling in the Detroit and Sarnia formations. And those nega barrels under our automaking centers, the saved barrels, cost only $18 each. That's to pay for the electrification, since the ultralighting turns out to be approximately free. And that saved oil is domestic, secure, carbon-free, and inexhaustible. The same physics, actually, I'm going to show you one more slide I hadn't expected to, or maybe 2 more, that I think will help explain how this happens. So let's go to here. Back in 2000, working with a couple of European Tier 1s, we designed a mid-sized carbon fiber SUV with half normal weight. It would get 3.6 liters per 100 kilometers, 67 miles per US gallon on gasoline, or 2.06, that's 114 miles a gallon equivalent on hydrogen. And it was an uncompromised crossover mid-size SUV. I expect you can see a lot of things over the way at the auto show. But what was most interesting about it is how it's made. If you looked inside, you would find only 14 parts in the composite body. And like an airframe, they're suspended from rings, not built up from a tub, which is our horse and buggy legacy in the car business. Each part is made with one low-pressure die set. In a steel SUV body, you would have 10 or 20 times more parts, each with an average of 4 progressive steel stamping die sets. So you just saved about 98 or 99% of the tooling cost. Then each of these parts can be lifted with one hand and no hoist. The biggest part on the side I can briefly lift with one finger. Then the parts snap precisely together for bonding, so you don't need the robotic body shop. And if you lay color in the mold, you get rid of most or all of the paint shop as well. So the 2 hardest and costliest steps in automaking went away. Also the propulsion system gets 2/3 smaller. So those savings together in manufacturing and powertrain pay for the carbon fiber. That's why the ultralighting is approximately free. And carbon fiber itself is probably about to get a lot cheaper. And the unusual design process from the Lockheed Martin Skunk Works that we used for that project was then, I'm told, used by Toyota, to whom we had told it, to design this remarkable concept car 7 years ago. It has the interior volume of a Prius hybrid, but half the fuel use and 1/3 the weight, 420 kilos. If it were an ordinary, not a plug-in hybrid, 400 kilos. in its featherweight. And I expect they didn't do it for amusement. In fact, just to show that, the day before they showed this car, they had Torre, the world's biggest maker of carbon fiber, announce a big factory to mass produce carbon fiber car parts for Toyota, not a phrase previously much heard in the industry. And now there are 4 or 5 other automakers in that consortium. So Volkswagen and BMW will soon gain worthy competitors, and not only in Japan. Now, the same physics and the same business logic also applied to big vehicles. The one in the upper left was just shown by Walmart. Their heavy trucks, the biggest civilian fleet in the world, I believe, are using smarter designs and logistics to haul each case with 44% less fuel than they used 9 years ago. And the concept truck they just showed will get them further than that. In fact, it gets towards the technological fuel-saving potential of tripled efficiency in Class 8 heavy trucks. And that plus tripled to quintupled efficiency airplanes, now being designed at places like Boeing and NASA and MIT, can altogether in heavy vehicles save the United States nearly $1 trillion net present value in fuel. But in both the heavy and the light vehicles, today's military revolution in energy efficiency, in their cars and planes and land vehicles and trucks, is going to speed up the fuel savings in the civilian sector, which uses over 50 times as much fuel, huge leverage, in much the same way that military R&D in the past gave us the internet, the global positioning system, the jet engine industry, the microchip industry. Only this time, what it leverages is getting the country off oil, so we needn't fight over oil. Neither would Canadian forces need to fight over oil. And then our warfighters can have neg emissions in the Persian Gulf. Mission unnecessary. As an advisor to the Chief of Naval Operations, I can assure you they really like that idea. Now, we can also use vehicles smarter as we build them better. This is a graph of traffic congestion in the United States with the morning and evening rush hours. And if that were an electricity load shape, we would throw a lot of IT-enabled smart grid and demand response and pricing at it to try to flatten out those peaks. But by not yet doing that for road traffic, we are wasting many billions of dollars a year in idle people, idle vehicles, and idle roads. But rather than just standing back and watching traffic double as is officially forecast, we can cut needless driving by 4 very powerful techniques. We can charge drivers for the road infrastructure they use not by the liter but by the kilometer. We can use smart IT to enhance public transport and empower car and ride sharing. We can allow lucrative smart growth and new urbanist real estate models so more people are already where they want to be and don't need to go somewhere else. And we can use IT to make traffic free flowing. And together, these proven methods can give us the same or better access with, in the US case, 46 to 84% less driving, saving another $0.4 trillion plus another $0.3 trillion from smarter use of trucks. So 40 years hence, a far more mobile US economy can use no oil. And saving or displacing each barrel for $25 US rather than buying it for upwards of 100 saves $4 trillion net present value. That would be 12 trillion if we had counted just the hidden economic and military costs of US oil dependence. Canada has certain costs of oil dependence as well. Now, to get mobility without oil, to phase out the oil, we can first get efficient and then switch fuels. So the purple wedge is the savings already baked into the government forecasts. The big blue wedge below it is all the savings they didn't count from vehicle fitness and resulting electrification. And then the aqua below that is for more productive use of vehicles. We can then run those 1 or 2 liter per 100 kilometer autos on any mixture of electricity, hydrogen, and in orange advanced biofuels. Heavy trucks and airplanes can realistically use advanced biofuels or hydrogen, but no vehicle will need oil. In fact, the trucks could even use natural gas, but they won't need oil, and any biofuels the U.S. might need, at most 3 million barrels a day, could be made 2/3 from wastes without displacing cropland and without harming climate or soil. So our little team speeds these oil savings by what we call institutional acupuncture, where the business logic is congested and not flowing properly. We insert little needles in selected points in partners like Ford and Walmart and the Pentagon to get that chi flowing. And this long transition is already well enough underway that even 5 years ago, mainstream analysts were starting to see peak oil not in supply, but in demand. Deutsche Bank, Citi, Financial Times have forecast that world oil use may peak in this decade and then decline because, like whale oil in the 1850s, oil is becoming uncompetitive even at low prices before it becomes unavailable even at high prices. But the electrified autos needn't add new burdens to the electricity system. Rather, when smart autos exchange electricity and information through smart buildings with smart grids, they add to the grid valuable distributed storage and flexibility that help the grid to accept variable solar and wind power. So electrified autos make the auto and electricity problems easier to solve together than separately. And they also converge the oil story with our second big story, saving electricity and then making it differently. And those twin revolutions in electricity promise more numerous, diverse, and profound disruptions than in any other sector, because we've got 21st century technology and speed colliding head-on with 20th and even 19th century institutions, rules, and cultures. Now, changing how we make electricity gets easier if we need less of it. Today, most of it is wasted, despite all the years of good work and PowerSmart and so on. And the efficiency technologies keep improving faster than we install them. So the unbought reserve of negawatts, saved watts, keeps getting bigger and cheaper. But as buildings and industry start to catch up and get efficient faster than they grow, electricity use, instead of growing 1% a year as officially forecast, could start shrinking 1% a year despite the electrified autos. And in fact, U.S. electricity demand peaked in 2007. It's been drifting down ever since. Same in Germany, same in Denmark. And the electricity used, adjusted for weather, per dollar of real GDP actually fell in 2012 alone by an unprecedented 3.4% in 1 year. But we can keep demand dropping as the economy grows by reasonably accelerating existing trends. Over the next 40 years, U.S. buildings, which I'll remind you use 3/4 of the electricity, can triple or quadruple their energy productivity, and that would save 1.4 trillion net U.S. dollars with a 33% rate of return. So the savings are worth 4 times their cost. Industry can also accelerate and double its energy productivity with a 21% internal rate of return. And to do these things by 2050, we just need to ramp up by 2030 the national average adoption of efficiency to the levels that our Pacific Northwest states, right over the border from here, already achieved 9 years ago. Now, a key to such big savings is a disruptive innovation we call integrative design that can often make very large energy savings cost less than small or no savings, turning diminishing returns into expanding returns. That's how our 2010 retrofit is saving 2/5 of the Empire State Building's energy. Remanufacturing its 6,514 windows on site in a temporary window factory on a vacant floor into super windows that pass light but block heat, plus better lights and office equipment and the like, cut the maximum cooling load by 1/3. And then renovating smaller chillers instead of adding bigger ones saved $17 million of capital cost, paying for most of the other improvements and cutting the payback to just 3 years. That is, by the way, the same payback that a major energy service company had offered to save just 7%. So we got 6 times bigger savings by optimizing the building as a system rather than the components in isolation. Our latest cost-effective deep retrofit of a difficult 48-year-old U.S. government building that faces the wrong way is expected to cut its energy use 70%, probably making it more efficient than the best new U.S. office building. For the 30,000-odd European passive buildings that, like ours, need no heating but have about normal construction cost, and they don't need to look like this to work like this. Now, you can see most of the way towards the right at the bottom, there's this blue atrium. Those windows insulate like 14 sheets of glass, would look like 2 and cost less than 3. Our best ones are like 22 sheets of glass. So let's go into that atrium, and it looks like this in a February snowstorm. In fact, when I took that picture a couple of years ago, we were ripening 5 banana crops at once. Right now we've got 6, numbers 48 through 53. You can see at the upper left some recent banana crops that a year ago harvested themselves when their 30 kilos of weight pulled down the tree. And this is again without the normal furnace. Now, in 1984, when I moved in, this house was saving 99% of the normal space and water heating energy, half the water, 90% of the household electricity, all with a 10-month payback. Today's technologies, which we've retrofitted lately, are much better. So we're monitoring 300 data streams to see how much better. The trouble is the monitoring equipment seems to be using more electricity than the lights and appliances. And the same techniques of integrative design have now been used to eliminate air conditioning up to 46 Celsius in ordinary-looking tract houses with lower than normal construction cost and better comfort. They've been used in steamy Bangkok to save 90% of air conditioning energy with normal construction cost and better comfort. Probably about everybody in the world, except perhaps a few of our Inuit friends, live in a climate somewhere between Bangkok and Old Snowmass. But wherever you live, the key is integrative design that gives multiple benefits from single expenditures. So the white arch you see at the top holding up the middle of my house actually has 12 different functions, but only one cost. Integrative design can also increase the $500 billion of conventional energy savings in industry. Dow Chemical's already captured over $9 billion of those savings on a $1 billion investment, but there's a lot more to do. For example, 3/4 of the world's electricity runs motors, half of that runs pumps and fans, and we can make all that equipment a lot better. There's about 35 things you can retrofit into a typical industrial motor system to save about half the energy with about a year payback. But first, we ought to be capturing the bigger, cheaper savings that are normally ignored and are not in any official study and are not in the engineering textbooks yet. For example, pumps. The biggest use of motors move liquids through pipes. But a typical industrial pumping loop was redesigned to use at least 86% less pumping energy, not by getting better pumps or motors or controls, but by replacing long, thin, crooked pipes with fat, short, straight pipes. This is not rocket science. This is good Victorian engineering rediscovered. And of course, as we rearrange our metal furniture as designers, we're also saving capital cost because less friction in the pipes means smaller pumping equipment and less capital cost. When we did that in our own house, we saved 97% of the pumping energy with lower capital cost. So what do such savings mean for the electricity that is 3/5 used in motors? Well, from the coal or other fuel burnt in the power plant, there are so many compounding losses that only 1/10 of that fuel energy actually comes out the pipe as flow. But we can take those compounding losses from left to right and turn them around backwards into compounding savings from right to left. Every unit of flow or friction we save in the pipe compounds back again to save 10 units of fuel and cost and pollution and what Amory Lovins calls global weirding back at the power plant. And of course, as you go back upstream, the components get smaller and cheaper. So our team has lately found such snowballing energy savings in over $40 billion worth of diverse industrial redesigns, from this Hewlett-Packard data center and Texas Instruments chip fab to Rio Tinto and Anglo-American mines and Shell hydrocarbon facilities. And typically our retrofit designs save about 30 to 60% of the energy with 2 or 3 year paybacks, whereas in new facilities, savings are a bit bigger, say 40 to 90 odd percent, but almost always with lower capital cost. Now, needing less electricity would in turn ease and speed the shift to new sources of electricity, chiefly renewables. China leads their explosive growth and their plummeting costs, shown here on a logarithmic scale for photovoltaic modules in blue and wind farms in green. Both of those in good U.S. sites are already marketplace winners, beating new combined cycle gas plants on levelized cost of power, even though they're generally subsidized less than non-renewables are permanently. By the middle of last year, new solar power in the western U.S. was selling for as little as 5 cents or less a kilowatt hour, Midwestern wind power for less than half that much. Now, in Germany, the installed photovoltaic system cost only half as much as the average American ones, even though we all buy the same equipment. They just install it more efficiently. Our installers are catching up. But today, in 20 states or so, entrepreneurs like Lennon Rive's Solar City, you heard about in the earlier panel this morning, will happily come install solar power on your roof with no down payment and beat your utility bill. I expect soon that offer may turn to cash back. And such unregulated products could ultimately add up to a virtual utility that could bypass power companies just as cell phones bypassed wireline phone companies. This sort of thing gives electricity executives nightmares and venture capitalists sweet dreams. And it's happening right now in Hawaii, where 10 or 15% of all the houses are using solar power, and many have dropped off the grid, done their own storage, and found it's cheaper that way. A wave of grid defection that we've recently analyzed could sweep across the continent well within the lives of existing utility assets. Or, of course, incumbent electricity providers could turn that insurgency into new business opportunities. And we're working both sides of that street. We have 2 electricity practices, one helping defenders, one helping attackers. Competition is good. Now, here's the big picture. Worldwide, in each of the past 6 years, half of all the new generating capacity has been renewable. And this graph shows the amount of wind and solar capacity, solar just crossed wind this past year, added each year. This is not the cumulative capacity, this is the net additions. Because electricity production has become a scalable global commodity, a manufactured product. China in 2012 made more wind power than nuclear power. They doubled each year their wind power for 5 years running. Last year, China added more solar power than the United States has, and we invented this stuff. And the global clean energy sector has brought Europe over 1 million renewable energy jobs. It's created more American solar jobs than we have coal or steel jobs. And in each of the past 3 years, these modern renewables got $250 billion of global private investment and added over 80 gigawatts. So they have far surpassed the global installed capacity of nuclear energy, whose dwindling annual net additions actually turned negative before the Fukushima accident. And the coal and nuclear plant orders are dwindling worldwide because they don't have a business case. Too much cost, too much financial risk. Now, the reason for this rapid growth is that modern renewables scale up in a fundamentally different way. We used to build a cathedral that would take maybe 3 years to license, 4 years to build, but meanwhile, each year, you can build a solar factory that each year thereafter produces enough solar modules that each year thereafter they will produce as much electricity as your cathedral would have produced after 7 years or 10 years. And that's why solar output scales up incredibly quickly, in this case 15 times faster in the illustration. We're often told, though, that only coal and nuclear plants can keep the lights on, along with big hydro dams, because they are 24/7, while wind and photovoltaics are variable and thus supposedly unreliable. But neither part of that statement is true. First, variable does not mean unpredictable. We can predict solar and wind power at least as accurately as demand. In this stormy winter month, forecast output of France's wind farms almost exactly matched the actual output one day later, and the remaining error vanished some hours before actual dispatch. Second, no generator is 24/7. They all break. And when a giant coal or nuclear plant fails, 1 billion watts vanishes in milliseconds, often for weeks or months, often without warning. Grids routinely handle that intermittence by backing up failed plants with working plants. And in exactly the same way, grids can handle the forecastable variations of solar and wind power from a portfolio diversified in type and location, forecasted and integrated with renewables at other places or of other kinds. Let me give you an example of how this can work. The isolated Texas grid's summer electric loads in 2050 can get a lot smaller with profitable efficiency, but it's still about 30 billion watts. So let's meet all of that renewably. We'll put in enough wind and solar to meet 86% of the annual load, and then the other 14% we'll get from the other renewables that are dispatchable. You can have them whenever you want. So that's geothermal, small hydro, solar thermal electric, burning municipal waste, burning energy studies, burning feedlot biogas in existing combustion turbines. So now we have 100% renewable supply, except it doesn't match the load shape very well. But now we can take those surpluses and put them into two kinds of distributed storage. We can use them to charge up both ice storage, air conditioning, and smart electric vehicles. And then in yellow, we can get that distributed storage back when we need it, fill in the last bits with some unobtrusively flexible demand. Now we have 100% renewable supply every hour of the year. We didn't put in any bulk storage to get that result, and there's only 5% left over. Now, this sort of choreography is not just theoretical. Some European countries, without adding bulk storage, are already delivering, last year, 25 to 58% renewable electricity, far more reliable than America's. Actually, the most reliable in Europe is from Denmark and Germany, and theirs is about 10 times more reliable than United States electricity. Also, Iowa and South Dakota are over a fourth wind-powered today. So they in Europe have far transcended renewable power's supposed reliability limits. Whatever exists is possible. And the National Renewable Energy Lab in the U.S. has exhaustively analyzed how this choreography could work for the lower 48 states. You can see the wind power in sort of salmon color, and the bright orange concentrating solar in the southwest, and the the photovoltaics in yellow winking on and off during the course of a summer few weeks. And the black bits are fossil and nuclear, which in their scenarios goes down to just 10 or 20% over time. Now, one of the most important examples of the decentralization trend sweeping the industry is Denmark, which over 3 decades has shifted from essentially all centralized coal-fired power plants to a constellation of decentralized wind turbines, 86% owned by farmers and their co-ops and communities, and ag waste cogeneration. And Denmark plans 100% renewable energy, not just electricity, by 2050. They're on track or ahead of schedule. They don't think it'll cost extra. And they've also been reorganizing their grid in a cellular architecture that makes cascading blackouts impossible. Now, in America, we have this aging, dirty, insecure electricity system that we have to replace anyway by 2050. And we could replace it with more of what we've got, or new nuclear and so-called clean coal, or centralized renewables, or half-distributed renewables. Surprise, they all cost the same. But they differ profoundly in their risks around national security, fuel, water, finance, technology, climate, and health. 7 kinds of risk. Same cost, different risk. This is a risk management play when we choose our electricity future. For example, we have this over-centralized grid, just as you do, very vulnerable to cascading and potentially economy-shattering blackouts caused by operational problems like, say, squirrels, tree limbs, ice storms, solar storms, superstorms, earthquakes, physical attacks, cyber attack. All these things have happened lately, although the solar storms haven't been big for a while, and that's just a matter of when, not if. But that blackout risk disappears, and all 6 other kinds of risks are best managed if we pick distributed renewables organized in microgrids that normally interconnect freely but can stand alone at need. So they can disconnect fractally, reconnect seamlessly. That is actually the Pentagon strategy for supplying power to its own bases because they need their stuff to work. Well, the rest of us whom they're defending need our stuff to work too. That's why my house works this way, with or without the grid. And at about the same cost as business as usual, that resilient grid architecture could maximize national and community and family security, customer choice, entrepreneurial opportunity, and innovation. So let me summarize the electricity story. Together, efficient use and diverse, distributed, renewable, resilient supply are starting to transform the whole sector, turn it upside down. Traditionally, utilities build giant coal and nuclear and gas plants. Of course, originally in Canada, a lot of hydro dams. Maybe they built a little efficiency in renewables. And those utilities were rewarded, as they still tend to be, they are in 36 of the United States, for selling you more electricity. But now, especially where regulators instead reward them for cutting your bill, the investments are going other way up. The market is shifting massively towards efficiency, renewables, combined heat and power, distributed storage, smart grids, ways to meld them all together reliably. And that is most true in the 30-odd of the United States, where demand-side resources are allowed to bid directly against supply in the same auctions. We had a big auction recently where I believe 92% of the winning bids came from the demand side because that's cheaper. So our energy future is not fate but choice, and that choice is extremely flexible. In 1975, the US government and industry all insisted that the amount of energy used to make $1 of real GDP could never go down. So it was heretical when I suggested in an article in Foreign Affairs magazine it could go down threefold. How are we doing? Well, it's down over twofold so far. And now we have so much better technologies, costing only a third as much. We have integrative design and better finance and marketing and delivery channels. So we now have a very clear line of sight to how to triple efficiency all over again at even lower cost. So to solve the energy problem, we just needed to enlarge it and integrate it. The results may at first seem incredible, but as that great Canadian Marshall McLuhan said, only puny secrets need protection. Big discoveries, he said, are protected by public incredulity. Now combine the electricity and oil revolutions, and you have the really big story, Reinventing Fire, where business, enabled and sped by smart policies in mindful markets, can lead the United States, and I dare say many other countries like yours, completely off oil and coal by 2050, saving in the US case $5 trillion, growing the economy 2.6-fold, strengthening security, and by eliminating oil and coal, and gradually phasing out gas, cutting carbon fossil emissions by 82 to 86%. Now, if you like any of those outcomes, any one or more will do, you could support this transition without needing to like every outcome, and without needing to agree about which outcome is most important. So focusing on outcomes, not motives, can turn gridlock and conflict into a unifying solution to our common energy challenge. And these best buys also turn out to be the most effective solutions to the big global problems that hazard every country's security and prosperity. Now, at our little public charity, Rocky Mountain Institute, we're helping smart companies get unstuck and speed this journey via many sectoral initiatives and projects, these and other newer ones. But of course, there's still a lot of old thinking around too. As the Canadian former oilman Maurice Strong said, not all the fossils are in the fuel. But DuPont's former chairman, Edgar Woolard, reminds us that firms hampered by old thinking won't be a problem because they won't be around in the long run. Now, what I've described for you is not just a once-in-a-civilization business opportunity. It's one of the greatest transformations in the history of our species. We humans are really inventing a new fire, and it's not dug from below, but flowing from above. I've even heard theologians talk about energy from hell and energy from heaven. And this new fire is quite different. It is not scarce but bountiful, not local but everywhere, not transient but permanent, not costly but free, and but for the transitional tail of natural gas and a bit of biofuel grown in ways that sustain and endure, this new fire is flameless and very efficiently used in a way that makes money. It really could enable energy to do our work without working our undoing. Each of you owns a piece of that prize wherever you live. Our book details how you can capture it. So with the conversation begun at reinventingfire.com, let me invite each of you to engage with us, with each other, with everybody around you, to help make Canada and the world healthier, richer, fairer, cooler, and safer by together reinventing fire. Thank you for who you are and what you do and all your good work. We have time for a few questions, so if you'd please come to the middle microphone, I'll be happy to try to address them. And some of them, I believe, have already been crowdsourced. Is that right, Clay? Clay, as the manager of our China project, of course, you're aware of how keenly enthusiastic our customers in the National Development and Reform Commission are receiving the Reinventing Fire concept. And actually, the Chinese edition of the book is coming out in the next few weeks. So we have about 40 researchers 8 or 9 months into a 2-year effort to analyze how this would work in China. It's very clear to us already, although we don't have the exact numbers yet, that we'll be able to come up with a dramatically lower energy future for China, meeting all of their economic growth assumptions, but with much lower emissions and costs. And they're already moving away from coal rather dramatically. In 2012, for example, the generation of electricity in China increased more by more terawatt hours a year from non-hydro renewables than from all fossil and nuclear sources combined. So they were still installing 43% of their new capacity as coal plants, but they were running the coal plants a lot less because the renewables are cheaper to run as well as cleaner. And anybody who, like us, has been in Beijing in recent weeks will know why that matters to health. When the air becomes unbreathable, it really gets your attention. Now, the tar sands are, I think, very aptly characterized in an excellent report by carbontracker.org, who put a number of oil patch financial analysts onto it. Try carbontracker.org/KXL, I believe, as among the very most expensive hydrocarbon projects in the world in dollars per barrel. And this means they're actually a very risky play, because if there's a slight dip in the oil price or an increase in the amount of capital needed or the cost of that capital, the business starts hemorrhaging money very quickly. I've actually consulted in that industry in Calgary before, tried to impress this upon the firms that were hoping to do tar sands. I'm afraid some of them have gone ahead anyway, and I think their capital is very much at risk. So I don't know what President Obama will say about the pipeline, but if he does not approve it, I think there's an appreciable chance of that. Much more costly alternative transport to market would be required. I think that would make the challenge of cost-effective oil from tar sands even greater, and it's already a formidable challenge. And I think in the long run, the energy investors might thank him for having saved them from the worst ravages of the bubble when it does collapse in due course. There are some similar considerations, somewhat different in detail, about massive LNG exports from this province. I've actually designed LNG liquefaction plants, and we know how to make them a lot more efficient, but it's a very expensive business. It takes a lot of energy to liquefy the gas and transport it. And that plus leakage along the gas supply chain end to end tends to eat up, offset, more than offset, depending on details, the carbon saving in switching from coal to gas. And by the way, the Asian market is not infinite. There are many competitors, many of whom already had LNG plants. So it's awfully late to come to that party. The great deals in Japan have been pretty much snapped up in the past few years. And I think by the time you could get LNG exported, you would find that the subsidies had eaten up the expected royalties. So that doesn't look like a great deal either. But remember the fundamentals here. What both of these resources have to compete with is not just coal. That has to compete with efficiency and renewables that are already taking over the market in China, as they are in the United States, as they are in much of Europe. No kind of hydrocarbon is going to compete with the $18 a barrel negabarrels from efficient cars that don't need any oil. No kind of electricity is going to compete with super efficient buildings and passive solar design, which, by the way, was invented in China. I describe my house to our Chinese visitors as 3,000-year-old North Chinese architecture, which was passive solar, plus modern North American super windows. So I think we need to look at the whole competitive landscape, and a hydrocarbon-rich country like Canada especially needs to do so in order to avoid costly investment errors that would actually retard rather than advance climate protection. So I hope that is helpful, and thank you again for your kind attention.